Birmingham, Alabama. Would you help someone who treated you like less than human? A hero can emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. Would you help someone who treated you like less than human? 7-year-old Jamal Parker had always been taught to do the right thing, but life had never been kind to him. He lived in a rundown house with broken windows, leaking pipes, and barely enough food to eat. His mother worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, while Jamal often wore the same tattered clothes to school. He had learned early on that the world wasn't fair. At school, he kept his head down, avoiding trouble. He wasn't a troublemaker, but teachers watched him like he was. Store clerks followed him when he walked in, assuming he was a thief. He knew what people thought of him, but he tried not to let it define him. On the other side of town, Officer Sarah Carter had everything: power, authority, and a deep-seated bias against kids like Jamal. "Stay out of trouble, boy," she would say, always assuming the worst of him. She had stopped him countless times for no reason, questioning him about things he had never done. To her, he was just another kid from the wrong side of town, a future criminal in the making. No matter how polite he was, no matter how many times he told her he wasn't doing anything wrong, she never saw him as anything but a problem waiting to happen. But one afternoon, the roles reversed in a way neither of them could have expected. Jamal was walking home from school, his backpack nearly empty, because his family couldn't afford supplies. He passed through a quiet street when he saw something unusual. Officer Carter, standing in the middle of the road, her hands clutching her throat. Her face was red, her breaths coming in sharp gasps. She staggered, her knees buckling. She couldn't breathe. Jamal froze. He could have walked away. He could have ignored the woman who had never given him kindness. But instead he ran toward her. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked, fear creeping into his voice. She didn't respond, her wide eyes filled with panic. Jamal remembered the posters in his school about choking emergencies. Without hesitating, he stepped behind her, wrapped his small arms around her waist, and thrust his fists upward in quick motions, just like he had seen in the pictures. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, a small piece of food shot from her throat, and she collapsed to her knees, coughing and gasping for air. Jamal stepped back, watching as she slowly regained her breath. A few bystanders had gathered, murmuring in disbelief. Officer Carter looked up at him, her expression unreadable. Jamal's heart pounded. He had done the right thing, but would she see him differently now? She wiped her mouth, her hands still trembling. She had spent years seeing kids like Jamal as nothing but trouble. And yet, the boy she had judged so harshly was the one who had saved her life. Because in that moment, everything changed. If you were in Jamal's position, would you have helped Officer Carter? Jamal froze, remembering all the times Carter had harassed his neighbors. She had stopped them for no reason, accused them of crimes they hadn't committed, and treated them like they were nothing. And now, here she was, vulnerable, helpless, and gasping for air. It would have been easy to walk away, to let her struggle the way she had made so many others struggle. But Jamal's mother had always told him that doing the right thing mattered, no matter who it was for. His conscience screamed at him to help, even if his heart told him otherwise. "Call an ambulance," Carter gasped, but there was no one else around. The street was eerily empty, and the people who might have stopped kept their distance. Jamal noticed her skin turning blue, her eyes wide with fear. She was running out of time. He could hear the shallow, wheezing sounds of her breath, struggling to push through the obstruction in her throat. He didn't have time to think. If he didn't do something now, she could die right in front of him. His mother had taught him basic first aid, just in case. He remembered the lessons she gave him in their tiny kitchen, practicing with a pillow, pretending it was a real person. The memory of her voice echoed in his mind as he took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Hold still," he said, placing his small hands on Carter's chest. His fingers trembled, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had to do this. He had to save her, no matter who she was. Using all his strength, he performed the Heimlich maneuver. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. Carter's body convulsed, her hands clawing at her throat. He gritted his teeth and tried again. 4, 5. Suddenly, Carter gasped, coughing violently as the blockage in her throat cleared. She collapsed to her knees, sucking in deep breaths of air as if she had just surfaced from drowning. Jamal stepped back, watching her carefully. The cop, who had always seen him as a troublemaker, now owed him her life. He had never seen her like this, defenseless, human. The woman who once made him feel like a criminal just for walking down the street was now looking up at him with something he couldn't quite place. Was it gratitude? Shock? Shame? Maybe all three. A few bystanders started clapping, whispering amongst themselves about what they had just witnessed. Some had taken out their phones, recording the moment. Jamal didn't care about any of that. His heart was still racing, his hands shaking from the adrenaline. He wiped them on his jeans and took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "You good?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Carter nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Yes." She looked like she wanted to say more, but no words came out. The sirens of an approaching ambulance broke the silence, their wailing sound growing louder as paramedics rushed over, helping Carter to her feet. "What happened?" one of them asked. "He saved me," Carter admitted, glancing at Jamal with something that almost looked like respect. He could hardly believe she had said it out loud, that she had acknowledged what had just happened. But he didn't wait for thanks. He turned, ready to leave. This wasn't about recognition or approval. He had done what he knew was right, and that was enough for him. But before he could go, Carter called out, "Wait." Jamal hesitated. He had expected her to let him walk away, to pretend this had never happened. Instead, she met his gaze, and for the first time, she didn't look at him like a suspect. "Thank you." The words were simple, but they carried more weight than she probably realized. Jamal gave her a small nod before walking away, blending into the city streets once again. He didn't need her gratitude, but a part of him wondered if this moment had changed something. If maybe, just maybe, she would see the world, and the people in it, a little differently from now on. Carter caught her breath, looking at Jamal as if seeing him for the first time. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, heavier than her uniform, heavier than the badge she had always worn with a sense of righteousness. She had spent years patrolling these streets, believing she knew who belonged and who didn't. Jamal was one of those kids she had always assumed was trouble. But now, that same boy had just saved her life. She rubbed her throat, still feeling the ghost of the obstruction that had nearly killed her. Why did you help me?" she stammered, her voice rough from coughing. Jamal wiped his hands on his jeans and shrugged, because it was the right thing to do. His words were so simple, so matter-of-fact, yet they struck Carter like a slap. The right thing to do. Had she always done the right thing? Had she ever looked at kids like Jamal beyond her assumptions, beyond the statistics she had been taught to believe? She had thought she was protecting her community. But was she? Or had she just been protecting the version of it she wanted to see? The paramedics checked her over, their voices distant in the back of her mind. She barely registered their words. Instead, her focus remained on the boy standing in front of her. She had dismissed him so many times, ignored his existence, unless it was to reprimand him. Yet, when she had been on the brink of death, he had been the only one willing to help. She reached for her radio instinctively, a habit ingrained in her, but then hesitated. What was she going to say? That a kid she had unfairly judged had just saved her life? That she had been wrong about him, about so many others like him? The weight of her own actions hit her like a blow. She had spent years assuming the worst in people like Jamal. Now, she had to face the truth. She finally looked him in the eyes, really looked at him. "I misjudged you," she admitted, her voice quieter than before. Jamal tilted his head slightly, skeptical. "Yeah?" Carter nodded. "Yeah." The two stood there, the sounds of the city swirling around them. But in that moment, it was just them. Carter had spent her career defining people with quick judgments, but those judgments had never been challenged, until now. Jamal gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "People like me. We just want to be seen for who we are, not what you assume." Carter had no response. For the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. No defense, no argument. Just the realization that she had been blind to a truth that had been in front of her all along. As Jamal turned to leave, Carter felt an unfamiliar urge to stop him, to ask him more, to understand. "Wait," she called. He paused, looking over his shoulder. "What?" She swallowed, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. "Thank you." Jamal nodded once and walked away, blending back into the city streets. Carter stood there, her world shifting beneath her feet. She had always believed she knew right from wrong, but today a 7-year-old boy had taught her what justice truly looked like. Sometimes it takes a life-changing moment to break down prejudice. The question now was, what would she do with it? A bystander had recorded the entire incident. The video of Jamal saving Officer Carter went viral overnight. Social media erupted with debates. News outlets picked up the story, and soon everyone had an opinion. Young, black boy saves officer who harassed him. What happens next will shock you. The headlines spread like wildfire, turning Jamal into an unexpected symbol of kindness and forgiveness. People in the community were divided. Some praised Jamal's actions, calling him a hero. "This boy showed more humanity than the system ever has," one commenter wrote. Others questioned whether Carter even deserved saving. Would she have done the same for him? Another asked. The mayor's office released a statement. "This event should make us all reflect on the kind of policing we want in our communities." A local pastor called for unity, urging people to see this as an opportunity for change. Meanwhile, activists pushed for an investigation into Carter's previous conduct, demanding accountability. Carter? She stayed silent. For days, she avoided the media. She avoided her own reflection. She had spent years enforcing rules, believing she was on the right side of justice. But now, for the first time, she was questioning herself. The way she had treated Jamal, the way she had treated so many others, was she really protecting the community, or just reinforcing a broken system? When she finally returned to the station, her fellow officers were waiting. Some clapped her on the back. "You good?" one asked. "Lucky that kid was there." Carter forced a smile, but something inside her had shifted. "Yeah, lucky." That night, she rewatched the video. She saw the way Jamal had acted without hesitation, the way he had saved her even after everything she had done to make his life harder. and she saw the way the world was now watching, waiting to see what she would do next. The world was watching. But would Carter change? As the days passed, protests erupted in front of the police station. Justice for Jamal! Signs filled the air. People weren't just demanding a thank you from Carter. They were demanding real accountability. News crews followed her every move, waiting for a statement. Her phone buzzed constantly. Some messages were from fellow officers offering support. Others weren't so kind. "Don't let them break you," one text read. But Carter was already breaking, not from the pressure of the media, but from the weight of her own reflection. She drove through Jamal's neighborhood one evening, seeing it through new eyes. The broken streetlights, the lack of parks, the over-policing. She had patrolled these streets for years, but she had never really seen them before. Jamal's mother stood outside their house, arms crossed as Carter approached. "What do you want?" she asked, voice sharp. Carter swallowed hard. I wanted to say thank you. To your son." Jamal's mother studied her. "And," Carter hesitated, "and I want to do better, but I don't know how." For the first time in her life, Officer Sarah Carter wasn't giving orders. She wasn't assuming she had all the answers. She was just a person, standing before the people she had wronged, asking for guidance. Jamal's mother sighed. "Then start by listening." The world was still watching. And for the first time, Carter was ready to listen. A week later, Jamal was walking home past the cracked pavement of his neighborhood. The weight of the past few days still lingered. His name was everywhere, but his life hadn't changed. He still went to sleep hungry, still wore the same shoes with holes in the soles. He had saved a life, but his own still felt like it was stuck in survival mode. A police cruiser pulled up beside him, its flashing lights off. Jamal tensed, instinctively preparing to run, but then he saw who it was. Officer Carter. She stepped out, her uniform looking heavier than before. "Jamal, can we talk?" Jamal crossed his arms, his face blank. "What do you want?" Carter hesitated. For years, she had been the one with the power, the one who spoke, while others had to listen. But now she was the one searching for the right words. "I was wrong about you. I've been wrong about a lot of things." Jamal scoffed. "Yeah, I know." Carter nodded, accepting his anger. "I can't change what I've done, but I want to do better. And not just words, actions." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "And?" Carter reached into her pocket and pulled out an envelope. "The police department put this together for you. A scholarship, a new home for your family, a fresh start." Jamal's fingers trembled as he took the envelope, staring at the neatly printed letters inside. It didn't feel real. "For real?" Carter nodded. "For real. You saved my life. Now let us help change yours." Jamal's mother appeared in the doorway, her eyes wary. "What's this?" Carter looked at her, her voice softer than it had ever been. "A way to start making things right." Jamal's mother took the papers from her son's hands, her eyes scanning the details. Her throat tightened. "And you think this fixes everything?" Carter shook her head. But it's a start." Jamal looked between his mother and Carter, his mind racing. He had never expected this, not from her, not from anyone. The city had ignored people like him for years, but now, suddenly, the system wanted to help. "You really gonna change?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. Carter met his gaze. "I have to. You showed me that." The wind blew through the street, carrying the weight of an unspoken truth. This wasn't just about a scholarship or a home. This was about whether people like Carter could ever truly change. whether the system that had failed them could ever do better. Jamal exhaled slowly. I don't know what to say. His mother touched his shoulder. Then don't say anything. Just decide if you want a new start. Jamal clutched the envelope, feeling its weight. He had saved Carter's life, not for a reward, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. And now, maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to finally move forward. Carter stepped back toward her car, pausing before getting in. For what it's worth, Jamal. Thank you. Jamal watched her drive away, his grip tightening on the envelope. Maybe this was just one step. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like a step in the right direction. Inspired by Jamal's act of courage, the conversation about change spread far beyond their neighborhood. What had started as a moment between two people, one in need, one willing to help, became a catalyst for something greater. The local community, long skeptical of law enforcement, saw an opportunity to push for real reform. Community leaders gathered at City Hall, demanding answers. If a child can show more humanity than those sworn to protect us, what does that say about our system? One activist challenged during a town hall meeting. The mayor and police chief, under public pressure, announced new initiatives to rebuild trust, starting with extensive de-escalation training for officers and increased community involvement. Carter, still grappling with the events that had changed her, requested a transfer from patrol duty to community outreach programs. I can't erase my past mistakes, she admitted in a meeting with the department. But I can make sure I don't repeat them. At first, people were skeptical. Could someone like Carter really change? Could she truly become part of the solution instead of the problem? But she showed up at town hall meetings, at school functions, even at neighborhood cleanups. She started listening instead of assuming. She learned names instead of just faces, and she heard the stories of people she once dismissed. Jamal, despite all the media attention, kept his focus on what mattered most: his community. He started first aid workshops for kids his age, teaching them the skills that had saved Carter's life. Helping people shouldn't be rare, he told a reporter. It should be normal. Word of his efforts spread, and soon, local organizations stepped in to support his mission. A nearby hospital donated supplies for his workshops. A community center offered space for training sessions. Even teachers at his school began incorporating basic emergency response lessons into their curriculum. Meanwhile, Carter faced resistance from within her own ranks. "You're making us look weak," one officer told her. "No," she countered. "I'm making us accountable." Change was slow, and not everyone embraced it. But with each step forward, the line between us and them blurred just a little more. The police department implemented a civilian oversight committee to hold officers accountable. Funding was redirected toward education and outreach instead of just enforcement. And for the first time in years, the community and the department were having conversations, not confrontations. Jamal's story was no longer just about a boy saving a cop. It was about what could happen when people, no matter their differences, chose to do the right thing. One night, after a long day of training kids in CPR, Jamal found Carter waiting for him outside the community center. "You were right," she said. "Helping people should be normal. And I have a lot more to learn." Jamal smirked. "Good, because I'm not done teaching. Because real change starts with action. Do you believe one act of kindness can change an entire system?" Weeks later, Jamal stood in front of his new home, the weight of the past slowly lifting from his shoulders. The walls weren't cracked, the windows weren't broken, and, for the first time in his life, he had a bed that was his own. The scholarship had secured his future. He could now dream bigger than just making it through the day. Reporters crowded around him at the ceremony, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. "Jamal, what's next for you?" one journalist asked, her voice filled with genuine curiosity. Jamal hesitated for a moment, thinking about everything that had led him to this moment, the streets he had walked, the hunger he had endured, the prejudice he had faced. And yet here he was, standing in a place that once felt impossible. He smiled, his confidence unwavering. "I think I want to be a doctor. People seem to need a lot of saving." A chuckle rippled through the crowd, but it wasn't amusement. It was admiration. People saw the resilience in him, the strength that had carried him through years of struggle. He had saved a life without expecting anything in return, and now the world was ready to give something back to him. As the ceremony wrapped up, Jamal glanced across the crowd and spotted a familiar face. Officer Carter. She wasn't in uniform, just standing quietly, observing. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment neither of them spoke. Then Carter gave him a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of what had passed between them, of the moment that had changed everything. Maybe people could change. Maybe. Jamal turned back to his mother, who held his hand tightly. "You ready?" she asked, her voice filled with pride and relief. He looked at his home, at his future, at the possibilities ahead. "Yeah, I'm ready." The story of a young boy from a forgotten neighborhood had reached the world, inspiring others to believe in second chances. His kindness had broken through walls that prejudice had built. And in the end, it wasn't just Jamal's life that had changed. It was his entire community's. Some battles are won in the courtroom, some in the streets, and some in the quiet moments where one act of kindness alters the course of history. Jamal had won his battle that day, but more importantly, he had rewritten the future. What lessons can we learn from Jamal's story? How can we apply them to our own lives? Would you have done what Jamal did? Comment below, like, and share if you believe in second chances.